met when I was working at the Piper Gallery. I co-curated a show of 70s abstract painters, and Jeanne had one of her paper constructions there. And it was so admired, and I admired her work so much that I approached her then and said, would she consider putting her work here with me for this lovely show. And then we did a little catalog, and we talked about who, Sasha Craddock and others who had written about her work, and then she mentioned Sarah Kent, and I was very excited about meeting Sarah at last, because I've seen her name for about 20 years in the art world, and I think we never really have, had a conversation. So it's a great pleasure, and I'm sure it's going to be a very stimulating and interesting interview. And we've got a little video over here as well, some slides that they'll refer to. So I'm going to let you two just take over and have a little chat.
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
I'm Sarah Kent, as Sandra just pointed out. And the reason I'm here is because I've known Jeanne since we were at the Slade together. And I was then a very ambitious young painter. I was going to wow the world with my great masterworks. But I gave up and became a critic, whereas Jeanne persevered. And I have to say, I really admire you for persevering when there was so little incentive to do so. Because it's difficult doing that, just keeping going. You have to have a really strong kind of vision of what you're doing and where you're going in order to be able to do that. So that brings us to these wonderful paintings that we're looking at here, which we want to talk about first. Now, the first thing I want to ask you, because this exhibition is called Magnetic Fields, so I want to ask you about that title. Does the title come first or last, or does it kind of arrive somewhere in the middle, or how does it happen?
No, titles always come afterwards. It's a kind of intellectualizing about the work I've done. I do the work, I paint intuitively. One thing follows from the other, and then the title somehow suggests itself to me. I thought Magnetic Fields was appropriate to these. These are the come from a sequence of new paintings the last 2 years, and later we can talk about what led to them, but they have a lot to do with the way I draw. I draw a lot, and drawing for me is a way of working out ideas. So if it looks as if I can use the idea for a sequence of paintings, I was inspired by the mosaics in Venice, and also in the cathedral outside Palermo. I wanted to get a colour which was the equivalent of that dark glow. So that explains the colour I've arrived at using for these. I was inspired by the mosaics in Venice, and also in the cathedral outside Palermo. I wanted to get a colour which was the equivalent of that dark glow. So that explains the colour I've arrived at using for these.
Now, when you get close
Yes.
to the paintings, you notice that there's a pencil grid
Yes.
underneath them.
Yes.
Is that, are you gridding up from the drawing?
It is.
Yeah.
It is, and also I leave it. It's a kind of part of the history of the painting, the grid, and also it's like the white ground. It suggests that the actual image is a fragment of something much bigger. Mm-hmm. At least to my mind, the grid helps with mm-hmm. that. It could go on endlessly, expanding sideways, and the white is really a source of light. Behind.
So when you're working on a painting, do you have the drawing beside you? How similar is the painting to the drawing that it's based on?
Yes, I start with drawing, the lines, if you like, on the canvas. So the drawing I keep fairly to the actual paper drawing. But then I draw the paint, and it's a kind of skeleton for the painting, which grows using the colours on top of that skeleton, as it were. So, the earlier stages of these paintings would just be a coloured drawing, just lines.
Okay. And you're obviously, because the paintings are very meticulous and the marks are very tiny, you're obviously working very, very close to the canvas.
Yeah.
So that means you can't see the whole. You're kind of immersed in the detail.
Yes.
So do you kind of creep across the canvas, or do you map it all out beforehand? Are you like an insect, or are you like an aeroplane? A pilot in an aeroplane?
No, neither of those. No, I don't have this image and of the painting, what it's going to look like. It's got to grow quite apart from intuitively and starting from the drawing. It grows bit by bit. And very, very slowly. These paintings would take about 2 or 3 months to do, usually 3 months. And the use of the colour in tiny flecks, if you like, or grains of colour, is to me a marvellous way of working, because it adds up bit by bit. But I don't stand back and see it as a whole. I don't do that. I start in the centre and work outwards, as I do with the drawings. And but I don't stand back and think, is this beautiful or is it ugly? That doesn't interest me. It's nothing to do with the way I work. And the process of applying paint is part of the image. I mean, the process is very important for me.
So it's a kind of meditative process, would you say?
I use very small brushes, and I use paint, acrylic paint, which dries very fast, so I can work. I don't know about meditative.
So what's going on in your mind while you're working, or is your mind completely blank? What's happening in your brain?
No, unfortunately, when you're, or at least I'm working alone in my studio, I have all sorts of memories, usually childhood memories, going through my mind. Some of them, deeply anguished, and others, funny. So I suppose that, but I know what I want, and I aim for something that feels right and is real. And when I say real, it's got to be, a painting for me is both an image and an object of contemplation, if you like. Contemplate it, and you kind of feel you want to get inside it, which why I use this kind of format. I'm very pleased with it. I feel right with this kind of format, so that I can actually go inside it, as it were. I always leave a space for me to get out of somewhere, a hole or something.
Well, you don't go to the edge ever, do you? I can't think of a single painting where you've actually gone to the edge.
No, then that's right, because again, it's something. It's like something that pulls energy towards itself, or it gives out energy from itself. Like, I suppose, a magnetic field, something like that. So the whole idea is that I don't want to find, that I have to work inside the edges of a canvas, which contains an image. I've never wanted that. I want to be unaware of the edges of the canvas. So it is like the image, if you like, is floating in a kind of uncertain space.
So how would you describe the white of the canvas? Is it background?
Yeah.
Is it as important as the web or the mesh of the colour?
Yes,
how do they interact?
It is. The lines, because lines sticking out of the image, if you like, then interact with the white. I don't see it as a background. It is, as in the earlier paintings, a source of light. I see it as a source of light, and the colour clusters, act as a kind of veil of colour, I hope, or a screen through which that white light sometimes pushes forward. and sometimes it's pushed back by the colour.
So, would you work on one painting at a time and finish it and then move on to another, or would you be working on several at the same time?
No, I don't. I work on one, and for as long as it takes for me to feel, so that it feels right. And if I were to go on and on with that, after that particular stage I've reached, it would mean changing the whole thing. So that's the time for me to move to a different painting, a different canvas. You know, when I've exhausted that, then it's time to move on to something else, to bring in something other. Not something else in the sense that I switch from one thing to another, but something that will grow out of these and lead to something newer.
Okay, so let's go kind of backtrack to where the ideas, if they're, I mean, you've used the word ideas a lot, but I suspect that what you're aiming towards isn't quite as concrete as an idea. It's not something you could formulate in words very easily. So let's kind of try and go backwards to where the ideas come from. Do they come from things you look at, from things you feel, from things you think?
Yes, what? All of those things. I mean, all of my work, I could say, quite simply, is based on something, the love of things seen. It could go back to early childhood memories of the Italian landscape, where I grew up.
Which was in the mountains?
Piemonte. Yeah. And it could also be something quite indefinable. I mean, like the late afternoon light coming through the blinds, you know, through the studio. Or it could be also something heard. I must tell you, I was educated at a Catholic school, and the nun who taught us, we were taught Latin and Gregorian chant, and nothing much else. But that was great. The nun teaching us Gregorian chant was very, very passionate about it. And she taught us, she made us aware of these great circular rhythms of the phrases falling and coming out of the silences between them. And so, in a way, in my mind, these silences in Gregorian chant are connected with the white spaces in my paintings. Something like that. You know, it's a kind of, you know, fanciful image, but it's quite real for me.
I was recently looking at a score for Gregorian chant, and they're kind of marked like this, aren't they? Is there any connection between your marks and the marks? No,
no, not at all. No, it was only the impression that these rhythms of the chant left with me, and the silences, you know, like silences in music.
So do you have music in your head when you're working at all?
Well, music is very important to me, but I don't listen to anything while I'm working. I want to concentrate. But no, music is very important, and the way composers talk about their music has been very influential for me too, because it's always very practical. You know, how they do things, how they arrive at, you know, what they're actually doing. But there are other things that have to do with, you know, the ideas about landscape and the ideas about Zen gardens, you know, something enclosed and sort of slightly cut off from the outside world. And some of the sites, the Maya sites in Central America, which had still a feeling left of sacred enclosures.
So have you actually visited those sites?
Yes, I have, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it was the experience of being in them that inspired you, or is it?
Yes.
Because a lot of your work reminds me, and I'm sure other people as well, of aerial photographs of things. So, you know, I'm just curious as to know whether it's the the actual experience of the place, or whether it's an image of the place.
Oh no, not an image. Not an image. It's an experience.
Mm-hmm.
You sort of absorb things, rather like the process of osmosis. You don't think, oh, this is wonderful. It's absolutely wonderful. I must use it. No, it creeps into my mind and stays there, and maybe comes out years and years afterwards. And I think I look at painting and think, oh, maybe it's to do vaguely with this particular experience, this particular feeling, and also the aerial views that you mentioned. That again, very beautiful pictures. The Hubble telescope pictures are I find very inspiring. And also, I've always loved maps, even as a child, because if you look at a tiny fragment of a map, and you can imagine, enlarged, rather like a small fragment seen through a reducing glass, then it becomes something quite different. It's no longer a map, which is where all the lines are very important, because lines are also to do with surface markings on stones, metamorphic rocks, glaring, and maps connecting one area of the map, one place to another. So every bit of it is differentiated, like thematic maps, or geology or vegetation, that sort of thing. So that's where the maps. Oh yes, and I did work in the cartographic department in the 60s for my holiday job.
So what did you do there?
The
cartographic department of where?
The GLC, Greater London Council.
Right. Yeah. What did you do there?
Oh well, I was given the chore. I was given a huge drawing board and the chore of turning verbal information into visual information.
Shall we look at some? On the screen we've got earlier work, which will kind of bring us. We're going right back.
These would have been 1970s. You're right. Yes, after I left the slate, of course. Yes. So this would be quite big, 5 feet square, and I would get the canvases, prime them, and put them on the floor, and then use very, very fluid liquid paint. Oil paint, and move the canvas so that the paint would go into sort of areas more dense, more transparent, because that was the way that I saw, that was a sort of way of getting to this idea of light coming to the painting. So they do. I call them wash paintings.
Were you aware of Maurice Lewis and Helen Frankenthaler? I mean, have other artists influenced you?
Yes, not influenced me in the sense I was aware of them, but I wasn't out to do what they were doing, at all. I experimented with tearing the canvas, say down the middle, like this one, and then gluing it together again. So as I moved the fluid paint across the surface, it would fall into the ridges. It would create ridges where the canvas joins were. And the next detail that you see is a detail of that. There you are. And that was what led me to working with a paper, tearing paper and putting it together. And so I stopped doing these because I didn't actually see a way of developing this particular way of working.
That's very interesting, because looking at those, I was thinking they're very fleshy. They're very tactile. And you're talking about light, but I see them as kind of all about sensuality. So it's interesting that it led on to the paper pieces. Can we go on? It's hard to tell what this is like, isn't it? But if you look over there, there's a small one on the wall in the middle, which is a recent. No, that's an early one, isn't it?
It's an early one. The same basis. These were late 70s. After I come back from my tour of the Maya sites, I wanted to do something to do with layering, with paper. And also I realized that just using paper, you would get the light and shadows, as one would with colour. So in a way, there was no need anymore to use colour anyway for these particular reliefs. And I made quite a lot of them, big and small.
And how many of them? Because this one's got, you're saying it had ink. The paper is impregnated with ink, and then you peeled the surface off.
No, this is an early one, like that one on the wall.
Yeah.
I would paint a sheet of paper with acrylic on the back, black acrylic.
Oh, acrylic.
And then, as I tore the paper up and glued it onto the canvas, they're always done on canvas. It's very soft paper and very thick. So as you peeled some of the layers away, of course the black edges would show up. And that in a way was like, it was beyond my control in that sense. Rather like the colour clouds, the page doing, going over the canvas. It wasn't something totally controlled by me. I didn't sort of think, now I want the shape to be like this. No, the shape somehow, I had obviously a vague idea of how it should go, but I mean the shape somehow grew out of the way of making. You'll see that this kind of file edge, rough edge, layered works leads straight on to the next series.
And it also relates to your pyramid there around the corner.
Oh, of course, yes, the pyramid.
The little one there.
Yes, yes, I filed the edges of that. I called that pyramid, yes, because the Maya sites were fascinating, the way that a lot of these early temples had been overgrown, and there were layers upon layers upon layers of them.
Let's move on to the drawings.
Yeah.
So is this ink?
Yes, it is. Just pen and ink drawings. They came out of the white reliefs, obviously, because I wanted to have the black and white equivalent of the light and shadow that I got in the reliefs.
Is it important to you that people understand what the work's about? Or if I kind of say, oh well, that looks to me like a spider's web.
No.
Does that matter? If I get it wrong, completely wrong?
I can't possibly control how people see any more than a composer can control, these sort of peripheral understandings or meanings of his symphonies.
But also that colour contrast, the green and the red, it creates incredible intensity of colour, doesn't it?
Yes, yes.
You don't see the dots, they're not so noticeable in these, are they?
The grains of colour.
The grains.
Yes.
The pointillés.
Well, you do in the painting. You obviously in a reproduction you can't see them. No, but they're very much there. And also you see in these you get well, I was aiming for luminosity, obviously, force fields. But these start with drawings. Again, I wanted to use two opposite colours in the colour circle, orange and blue, which is quite difficult because blue is, of course, is much heavier than the orange. So they have to, the relationship is quite different from using red and green, which are equal in force.
You're in Cézanne territory here, aren't you? Those are the colours he used. Repeatedly.
This is just a drawing. It's quite small.
You must enjoy being on your own.
Well, I have no choice.
You obviously don't have studio assistants.
No, I do everything myself because if I had assistants, I'd have to breathe down there next to see that they're doing it. I mean, I prime the painting, the canvas myself because it has to be done in such a way that it echoes the. I use a roller and Liquitex primer gesso, so that the actual white ground has to echo the graininess of the way I apply the colour. So
it has a texture.
Yes, they have a texture.
Of ideas, because what struck me about this whole sequence of images was that you called it from idea to image. implying that you started with something very specific and then that you developed an image that illustrated that specific idea, which isn't the case at all.
No, absolutely not. No, idea for me is something much, it's not an image in my mind. That is absolutely clear. An idea is more something that triggers off an image that I want to do something about in a painting or, you know, a drawing or something. It's just idea in the sense of something that is inside me that corresponds with something I've seen outside, that moves me, that excites me. It's sort of, again, working from the inside outwards.
Fantastic, thank you. Well, we've arrived. We have arrived at something final and complete. Is there anyone who'd like to ask a question or make a comment? Yeah.
Yes. I knew.
Well, I'd like to ask you, because looking at these paintings, and particularly the painting, I'm interested in the marks, and it seemed to me that the marks are quite similar. Do the marks have relation between them? In other words, do you work from one mark to another mark, almost like a
on one painting?
Yeah, on one painting.
Oh, yes,
or a drawing,
yes.
painting.
No, I do.
So that almost like, you know, I mean, it's obviously not like knitting, but in a way it is.
It's not. Yeah.
No, it's not.
Yeah.
But in a way it is, because knitting marks are very connected. The stitches. I don't knit, so I mean, but I imagine
it's an additive.
Yes, it's an additive process.
Yes, it's cumulative. It's more like a jigsaw puzzle, you know, very tiny bits and pieces which then come together and make the whole. Something like that. It adds up.
Have you ever made a painting that you hated at the end of it?
Well, I wouldn't go on with it that far. I mean, I've never tried to save a painting. If you know, it says to me, well, yes, I have made paintings that I haven't kept, of course. Quite a recent one of that series was so overloaded with things that it became almost decorative. So I got rid of it. But I like a certain austerity, a clarity.
Shall we adjourn, and then if anyone would like to ask Jeanne anything else, they can do so face to face? Yes, that's a good idea. Thank you.
What we'll do is we'll move the chairs so you can actually enjoy the paintings. So we'll stack these all up, have another glass of bubbly if you like. Please don't leave without taking a catalogue that we produced for the show. And then there are some other catalogues that Jeanne has for sale here. So thank you very much, Sarah.